It's March 15, 2013, in Hong Kong, a city known as one of the safest places on earth. Police arrive at an apartment expecting to find a missing elderly couple. Instead, they walk into what can only be described as a nightmare. Stuffed inside two refrigerators, sealed with tape, are two severed human heads belonging to Henry Chau and Moon Xue. In lunchboxes stacked throughout the flat, over 600 of them are pieces of their salted, cooked human flesh, carefully packed like they were prepared for a meal. But this wasn't the work of a serial killer or a career criminal, and the chilling part was that this was done by someone they had least expected, and he almost got away with it. Henry Chau Wing Ki and Moon Xue Yut Yi were an ordinary Hong Kong couple living ordinary lives in a city of 7.4 million people. Glory was 65 years old and Moon was 63, the age when many people are thinking about retirement, grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of decades of hard work. They lived modestly in their apartments in Tai Kok Tsui, a working-class neighborhood that had housed generations of families trying to make ends meet in one of the world's most expensive cities. By all accounts, they were dedicated parents. They had two sons, one older and one younger. For their younger son, Henry, they had done what countless parents do. They pushed him towards success. They paid for his piano lessons as a child. They hired private tutors. They believed education was the path forward, and they made sacrifices to provide it. They had even sent him to Australia to study actuarial mathematics at the University of Canberra, wanting to give Henry international opportunities. What Glory and Moon likely didn't know was that their well-intentioned efforts to help their son would become, in his mind, the source of his resentment. This is where our story truly begins, not with the crime itself, but with the psychological fractures in Henry that formed long before March 2013. Henry Chau Hoi Lung was born on June 7, 1983. From childhood, friends and family noted that he, quote, lived in his own world, a phrase that would echo throughout this case. He was withdrawn, struggled to make friends, and seemed perpetually frustrated with the expectations placed upon him. Elementary school piano lessons, meant to instill discipline and culture, became a point of contention. Rather than appreciating them, Henry resented them. By secondary school, his academic performance had declined, and he couldn't keep pace with his classmates emotionally or academically. For parents like Glory and Moon, this must have been confusing. They were trying to help. He was rejecting their help, so they made a decision that they believed would reset his trajectory. They sent him to Australia, but Australia proved to be a different kind of nightmare for Henry. He experienced bullying and discrimination, quote, being beaten by black people every time they saw him, as he would later describe to friends. The academic pressure mounted. The social isolation deepened. By 2003, just a few years into his studies, Henry dropped out. He told his parents he had successfully graduated. It was a lie. When the truth eventually emerged, his parents were devastated. They tried again. They enrolled him in a Hong Kong university. That also ended in failure. By his late 20s, Henry had become a fixture in online gaming communities. The one place where he felt respected, where he could adopt personas and fantasies of success. He was addicted to online gaming culture. He used an image of Adolf Hitler as his profile picture. He called himself a psychopath in online conversations, as if adopting the label gave him some kind of intellectual authority over his failures. A psychiatrist would later examine Henry multiple times. During one session, she mentioned that Henry had been disappointed that his IQ test score came back at 126. For context, an average IQ is 100. Henry was above average, but to him, 126 wasn't genius level, and anything less than genius was failure. Henry had dreams, but they were fantasies disconnected from reality. He wanted to find true love. He wanted to develop a new physics theory before turning 30. He had achieved neither. He had cycled through odd jobs, never staying more than a few weeks. He had fathered a child with a girlfriend but refused to acknowledge his responsibility, telling her to have an abortion and then cutting all contact when she refused. The portrait that emerges is of a man drowning in narcissism and self-pity, a man who blamed everyone but himself for his failures, his parents, his teachers, society, By 2012 and early 2013, Henry's financial situation had become dire. He was unemployed, living off his parents' money despite being nearly 30 years old. He had made poor investments and accumulated debt. His parents, reaching retirement age themselves, wanted him to move out and become independent. They wanted their lives back. In February 2013, Henry made an unusual request. He asked his parents to sell their flats and split the proceeds 3 ways: a third for him, a third for his older brother, and a third for themselves. It was a shocking demand from someone who had contributed nothing to the family assets. When his parents refused, as any rational parent would, something in Henry seemed to break. He stormed out of the apartment and cut off all contact with his family. It's important to note that Hong Kong, despite its glittering image of wealth and success, is also a city of extreme pressure, a place where educational achievement and financial success are deeply tied to self-worth. For a man like Henry, who had failed in education, failed in career, failed in relationships, and failed in independence, his parents' rejection was perhaps the final humiliation, and he decided, in the weeks that followed, that they would pay for it with their lives. It was actually much before February 2013, when Henry had stormed out of his parents' apartment, that he had planned their fates. In November 2012, Henry began discussing what to do with them with his accomplice and close friend, Angus Tsui Chun Ki. Angus was 35 years old, older than Henry by 6 years. He was a Macanese man of questionable character who had known Henry for several years, meeting him through a job around 2007. What drew these two together remains unclear, but what's documented is the shopping list they created and the receipts they kept. Over those 4 months, Henry and Angus bought knives, multiple knives. They purchased refrigerators, they bought microwave ovens, they bought a rice cooker. They were essentially furnishing a facility for processing human remains. There were notes found later, hidden beneath Angus's mattress, with detailed instructions on how to dispose of bodies. Bones were to be covered in sand and cement before being dumped into the sea. This wasn't improvisation. This was industrial-scale planning for a domestic murder. On March 1st, 2013, Glory and Moon walked into a building in Tai Kok Tsui with their youngest son, Henry, who had invited them over, ostensibly to show off what he had achieved in the last few months. His own apartment, furnished with furniture and appliances. It was captured on CCTV, 3 people entering, but only 1 would walk out alive. According to reports, Henry stabbed both of his parents in the neck and chest, the location of vital organs, the place where a skilled attacker aims to end life quickly. The exact sequence of events remains disputed, which is why the eventual trial became so contentious, but the outcome was never in doubt. Both of his parents were dead. What happened next in that apartment stands as one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. Henry and Angus chopped up the bodies of Glory and Moon into manageable pieces. They salted the remains, then they cooked them. According to testimony, they cooked the flesh like barbecued pork, similar to a commonly consumed dish in Hong Kong known as char siu. This was to make it easier to dispose of and to mask the smell of decomposition in Hong Kong's humid, subtropical climate. They then packed the cooked remains into lunchboxes, over 600 variously sized containers, and stored them in refrigerators. Their heads, severed and sealed in 2 different fridges, represented perhaps the final indignity. The heads are the seat of identity, of personhood. By separating them, storing them like inventory, the perpetrators completed the erasure of Glory and Moon as people. What's particularly chilling is that this happened in an apartment, in a city like Hong Kong, where buildings are stacked vertically and cramped small spaces can be the norm, where neighbors literally live on top of one another. Someone could have heard, smelled, or suspected something, but either by luck or design, no one did. Not yet, anyway. It was Henry's older brother who first questioned where his parents had gone. He noticed they weren't home and asked Henry if he knew anything. Henry said they had gone to mainland China to have fun. For 2 weeks, Henry maintained this fiction. Eventually, Henry and his brother reported his parents missing to the police. To play the part as distressed son, Henry even made a public appeal for information, asking for anyone to come forward if they had seen his elderly parents. During this time, he was going about normal life with a refrigerator full of his parents' remains. He was sleeping, eating, perhaps even going out with friends. The banality of the deception is almost as disturbing as the crime itself. a man casually explaining away his parents' absence to the world while keeping their heads on ice. But cracks were about to form. On March 14th, 2013, one day before the police discovery, Henry made a decision that defies rational explanation. He reached out to his cousin, Flora Siu Wing Kwan, and asked to meet her at a restaurant late at night. In what must have been a surreal conversation, Henry confessed. He told his cousin that he and a friend had killed his parents and cut up their bodies. Nobody really knows why Henry revealed this information to Flora. Maybe it was eating him up inside, or maybe he just saw the murders as an accomplishment and a source of pride. But Flora was stunned. She could barely process what he was saying, but Henry was far from finished confessing. The next day, March 15th, 2013, while accompanying his older brother to look for their missing parents to file a police report, Henry sent a WhatsApp message to friends admitting to the murders. In these messages, he claimed he was planning to create a missing persons case and dispose of the bodies piece by piece to buy himself some time to say goodbye to his friends. In the same messages, he called himself a psychopath. I cannot empathize with people's pain because of my experience from childhood and adolescence. He was essentially creating a documented confession, distributing it through a messaging app, making the police's job infinitely easier. It's possible he wanted to be caught. It's possible he wanted someone to know what he had done. Or perhaps he was so detached from reality, so convinced of his own superiority, that he didn't believe the ordinary rules applied to him. He was wrong, of course. The friends he confessed to immediately revealed this information to the police. Ironically, exactly when Henry was at the police station filing the missing persons report for his parents. Police arrived at Angus and Henry's apartment in Tai Kok Tsui early on March 15th, 2013, following the tip-off about Henry's WhatsApp confession. What they encountered was a scene that would shock even experienced homicide detectives. Bloodstains covered the floors and walls. Trash bags filled with cement and sand were stacked in corners. 7 knives, a saw, and various other tools used for dismemberment were scattered about. When they opened the refrigerators, they found exactly what the forensics officer would later describe in court: human heads, male and female, sealed inside. The lunchboxes, over 600 of them, contained the salted and cooked remains of Glory Chau and Moon Xue, meticulously organized like some grotesque inventory. The microwave was covered with human grease. A notepad under Angus's mattress contained the disposal instructions mentioned earlier. Henry Chau was arrested on March 15th, 2013. Angus was arrested the same day. Both men were taken into custody while the full horror of what they had done was just beginning to unfold in the international media. Hong Kong, ranked among the world's safest cities with one of the lowest violent crime rates globally, was reeling. Annually, the city experiences only a handful of homicides, and crime in general is still relatively very low there. But this case was different. The grotesque nature of the crime, the dismemberment, the cooking, the storage of human remains like leftovers, created a media frenzy that lasted months. For a city that prides itself on safety and stability, this was a violation of a different kind, a violation of the social contract. A reminder that evil doesn't need foreign accents or criminal organizations. It can speak Cantonese and grow up next door. Some experts noted that Hong Kong's very density, its vertical stacking of humanity, its lack of space, may have contributed to the disposal methods. One forensic pathologist, Philip Bay, would later describe that a murderer in rural Australia or Canada might simply bury a body and never be caught. But in Hong Kong, where apartments are small and neighbors are close, where you must share elevators with hundreds of households just to leave your building, disposing of a body is exponentially harder. The humid subtropical climate accelerates decomposition and odor, so some murderers have resorted to cooking or boiling remains to mask the smell. Another case where this rings true is the 1999 Hello Kitty murder, which I've covered on my channel. But the circumstances, a son killing his parents, the meticulous planning, the narcissistic psychology on display made it uniquely horrifying to a society built on traditions like family obligation. The investigation itself was straightforward in some ways, complicated in others. Henry's own confession via WhatsApp had essentially handed the police their case, but forensic evidence would still need to establish the exact sequence of events, the cause of death, and crucially, the roles of each man Autopsy results confirmed that both Glory and Moon had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and chest, vital areas consistent with intent to kill. But here's where the case becomes more complex. Henry had the motive and evidence that links him to the actual crime. But what exactly was Angus's actual role? The trial opened in August 2014, nearly 18 months after the murders. Henry Chau's defense was unconventional. His lawyers offered a guilty plea to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to his abnormality of mind. In other words, they were arguing that Henry's psychological pathology made him less culpable for murder. Angus denied involvement in the actual murders entirely. His defense was that Henry had shown him a box of human remains, that of Glory and Moon, after the murders, and threatened to hurt his mother if Angus didn't help him dispose of the bodies. This wasn't premeditation on his part. Angus's lawyers argued that this was coercion and that this wasn't murder. But the question remained, what was Angus's involvement? Yes, he admitted to helping dispose of the bodies. Yes, he was present at the crime scene, but did he participate in the murders themselves? The defense argued no. On March 20th, 2015, more than 2 years after the murders, the jury returned with their verdict. By a vote of 8-1, Henry Chau was found guilty on both counts of murder. Angus was found not guilty on both murder counts. The jury apparently believed that the evidence of his coercion, his relative powerlessness in the situation, and his minimal role in the actual killings were sufficient to acquit him of the most serious charges. He was also described as someone who was of diminished mind because of his IQ test score at just 84. Henry Chau received a life sentence on both counts of murder, with an additional 9 years and 4 months for preventing the lawful burials, sentences to be served concurrently. In Hong Kong, a life sentence means exactly that. He will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. For Angus, the judge handed down a 1-year sentence for his role in unlawfully dealing with the bodies. However, Angus had already been in custody on remand for 2 years, so he was immediately released. Hong Kong, like much of East Asia, is profoundly influenced by Confucian philosophy, which places enormous emphasis on filial piety, the obligation of children to honor, respect, and obey their parents. The parent-child relationship is not one of equals. It is hierarchical, with parents holding authority and children holding obligation. This philosophy has produced some of Asia's highest achieving societies. Across the region, educational outcomes are exceptional, innovation is driving global economies, and family structures remain relatively stable. But the cost, sociologically, is significant. The pressure on children to achieve, to succeed, to validate their parents' sacrifices can be crushing. Henry Chau's parents embodied this philosophy perfectly. They pushed him toward education, towards success, towards a better life than they had. They made genuine sacrifices, but Henry, unable to meet their expectations, and increasingly convinced that their love was conditional on achievement, came to resent them rather than appreciate them. Thanks as always for watching. If you enjoy my content, then please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the video in the algorithm. Additionally, if you want to show financial support, you can become a member on this channel, and you can find the links to Ko-fi and Buy Me a Coffee in the description of this video. Until next time.